Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Vintage Books Live. This week we have Justina Chen, whose most recent book is With Twice the Love, Dessie Mei, about two adoptees who discover they might have more than their orphanage in common. And I'm going to let Justina tell a little bit more about the beginning of the book. I always say, tell us about the book without giving anything away.
I love that. Thank you so much for everybody for joining us with a fantastic indie bookseller. We love vintage books. I was so, I don't know, blessed, happy to be given the idea of With Twice the Love, Dessie Mei. This is actually a love letter to my stepdaughters who are both adopted from China. Um, and, you know, I was talking to my friend who was actually my matchmaker who introduced me to the love of my life. And she was telling me that, she was adopted from Korea and she had always wanted to feel welcome, part of the Asian American community, but she never did. And that was like a stake in my heart because my mom right here, my beloved mama, she passed away this year along with my father. But my mom was such an ambassador of community. Like my kids would always ask me, why is Amma so popular? And it's because she was able to collect people, to pull them in, to really sink into their story, to make them feel safe. And for me, the daughter of this ambassador of community of belonging, to hear my friend, a good friend, tell me that she never felt welcome, that really hurt me, especially when I saw my mom in action with my two stepdaughters. She just scooped them up and she's like, these girls are mine. Let me feed you. And I knew then that I had to tell this story about what belonging, what it feels like. What does it look like? How do we give each other the sense of belonging? Because that's something we each can do when the world feels like it's burning up, it's on fire. What is the one thing we can do? Okay, we could actually make people feel welcome. And I think that is probably the biggest gift we could give people today, like right now. Like, you're welcome. You're welcome here. You're welcome with me. You're safe.
Can you tell a little bit about the story itself and the
Sure.
just kind of the maybe this like a light synopsis, just letting people know what the story's about.
Okay, so you meet Dessie Mei. She is a Spitfire. She is pulled from her little town in the middle of Washington and plunked into Seattle. She does not want to be there. It's the first day of her second time now into sixth grade because she's been pulled out of her school in the middle of the year. She walks into her classroom, and there is a girl who looks not just like her, but exactly like her. Could it be? Could it be possible? And so what we find out is that these two girls are adopted from the same orphanage, and they are twin sisters separated at birth. And one into a white family, one into an Asian American family. And so you kind of see their different experiences and really they're different experiences, but then they're also their commonalities. And this book really is about how do we bridge those differences when differences can really threaten to divide us. And you see that in the story.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, honestly, it was funny because I don't always look, when we are planning for like the fall season or the spring season or whatever, and we get the big publisher catalogs and
Mhm.
we all go through them and kind of leave notes for the buyer of, oh, I think this would be good for this reason or that reason. And my note in the catalog is, I would think we should buy this book, not realizing that you were from this area too, from Pacific
Yeah.
Northwest, but just we need this book because there's not this kind of representation
Uh,
in kidlit. And I have a daughter adopted from China, so there was a personal element for me as well.
oh, good.
And
Mhm.
and then when the book came, and I always look at the jacket copies every week. Um, because I want to know, did I miss anybody that's,
Mhm.
from the greater Pacific Northwest that we could get in touch with and talk to. And so that was when I realized, oh, hey, she's from Washington. We're gonna email her.
Yeah.
But it was that story
Mm,
that drew us in first, because there just isn't quite that. There's just not a lot of representation of the
mhm,
adoptive community in kids' books particularly, but really anywhere.
mhm,
Um, so that
mhm,
was definitely what caught our attention. But I'm curious, because I have read the actual stories of twins that do
mhm.
discover that they're
Oh yeah.
twins. Was there a particular story of that sort of inspired Dessie Mae and Donna, or was it just sort of amalgamation of all those stories?
It was more of an amalgamation. And so the first draft of the story, Dessie and Donna were actually from the same orphanage, but just friends. Okay. But then
Yeah,
my editor said, what changes in the story if we bring it even closer? You
yeah.
know, and I realized she was so spot on. This is why it's so great to have brilliant editors.
Yes.
All of a sudden, the conflict, the stakes are so much higher
Yeah.
when they are sisters. Um, I do want to say, I do think that there is a growing canon of adoptee stories
Yes.
that are
Yes.
written by adoptees that are brilliant and heartbreaking and insightful and inspirational. And so I think reading those books, you really understand why it's so important to have a heart that is belonging forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'll bug you a little bit at the end of the interview, because I know of a couple, but we'll bug you a little bit so we can add to our list, because
Yes.
there is a growing number, but it's still a pretty small list. And so I'm happy to see it getting bigger. I'm curious now specifically about the book. Um, and I think I probably know the answer to this, but I think it's an interesting discussion to have. So you place Dessie in a white adoptive family and Donna in a Taiwanese American adopted family. And I'm curious, can you talk about that choice and what you were hoping to do with making that kind of choice?
Mm. That is such a good question. For me, I wanted to make sure that I represented the adoptee experience as accurately, as authentically, and as tenderly as possible. And when I did so much research into the adoptee experience, what I realized is, well, there might be elements that are really universal, right? The sense of abandonment, the need to belong. Everybody's story. So for me, in this story, I really wanted to explore what it was like to have girls, um, who share the same exact DNA, go through life and walk through life with different experiences and different backgrounds, different ways of being, different ways of seeing the world. And how do you breach those differences? Like, how do we find our way to each other, even if we feel like we're speaking a whole different language or seeing a problem from completely a different viewpoint, right? And so that was why I really wanted to place them in two really distinctly different families who
Yeah.
will end up finding out that they have a lot more in common than they do
Yes.
different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm,
I loved that about that, because there were some very distinct similarities, but you
mhm.
kind of had to get past some of those cultural differences to realize that. I
Yes.
also can tell that you've done a ton of research, because I was flipping through today,
Yeah.
reading passages and thinking about questions to ask. And I was like, she really nailed the white adoptive parent thing. like, oh my. Because it is a journey, and you go into it thinking that, we read a lot and we did our homework and all of
Mhm.
that sort of thing, but we did it all in sort of the white adoptee, like, parent bubble. Like, we weren't outside that, and this was 20 years ago. So
Mhm.
we did what we thought was were things that we could do. But as you make the journey, you realize how sort of inadequate it is. And so it was interesting to see the
Mhm.
parents in the book sort of wrestling with some of the same things, of realizing that, oh, well, maybe we got this wrong, or, how does this work and how does that work? And what is my child's experience versus mine? And so I
Exactly.
really appreciated that about the book, that it wasn't just the kids whose stories were really resonant, but also the rest of the family too. So
Thank you. I really worked hard on getting the research right. So thank you so much for validating that point. But, you know, I feel, as the older I get, the more I realize that so many of us, we're just trying the very best we can with the tools that we have, the research that we're able to do. There is so much more written now about the adoptee experience
yeah,
than there was 20 years ago. You were just doing the very best you could, you
yeah.
know? And I really hope that there is this kind of sense of grace through this book too.
I definitely think so. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
good, because you know, and okay, so Brian Stevenson, in Just Mercy, he wrote something like, you know, as we go through life, we are going to be bumping into each other. Our elbows are out without
Yeah,
even realizing it. But the important thing is that we do not stop,
yeah.
keep going. Like we do not stop and turn backwards. We keep going. And I think that is so true with parenting,
Yes. Oh, yes.
kind of parenting, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, yeah.
okay, that was
Yeah.
a big mistake. Okay.
Next.
Right, exactly. Not doing that again, to learning from
Exactly.
it, and I think the girls too have that same experience, right? Dessie makes some difficult and hurtful choices. It really hurt her sister, you
Yeah.
know. And Donna didn't hold it against her forever. She was mad.
Yeah. Yeah.
She turned away from Desi, but ultimately there is this forgiveness, like, okay, I understand where you were coming from, but that's
Yeah.
nonsense. So let's move forward together.
Yeah. So I'm gonna look down with glasses because I can't read like tiny things. Um, I wrote this down this afternoon. I really love the conversation Dessie Mei and Donna have about feeling like cultural imposters. That was
Mhm.
something that I thought was really interesting. That Donna feels that way because she knows more about her family's Taiwanese culture than her birth Chinese culture.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the concept of culture, particularly in the adoptee community, because I think that that's kind of the heart. I think for me reading the story, and I'm sure that everybody who comes to the story will bring something different to it and get something different out of it. But I think for me, it's, and the parenting journey has been realizing, I remember saying when my daughter was really young, yes, it's good that she's in her family, but you also have to acknowledge that she lost her culture in the process. Like, you can't have the yay, she has a family, without also having the loss of everything that she was before. And I think that the piece of it that I was missing, that my daughter has taught me now as an adult, is that being in between culture, like you're not really in the Asian community, but in the white community, you're subjected to microaggressions all the time that your parents might not even be aware of until later. And 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 I think that that's a really powerful subtext of this whole book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how did you think about that when you were writing it,
Mm-hmm.
and conversations that you had around with other people as you were writing?
Yes. Oh my gosh. That that culture piece, that deep sense of loss and longing for culture, your cultural heritage. I had so many conversations and I just listened so intently to various people, adoptees talking about that sense of loss, but they were all adults. And
Yeah.
so distilling it down to a young person, like how would a
Mhm.
young person um, even approach the topic?
Yeah.
Their sense of awareness about it, right? So I knew I just needed to work really hard to make that right. Um, but then, in my own life, like back to my mom, okay, oh my goodness, I miss her so much. And I think one of the biggest joys of my life was watching my mom really bring in my stepdaughters who would tell me that sometimes, they would forget that they were Asian by
Yeah.
heritage, right? But her to kind of show them what it is to be an Asian American woman in our culture. Like this is what we do. Like we love people to death by food. I mean, you can leave the house without getting Tupperware containers of my mom's leftovers. The girls would sneeze, achoo, and basically a little red envelope would shoot over to them. I mean, little red envelopes are filled with money, and you usually give them
Yeah.
birthdays and Lunar New Year. But my
Yeah.
parents, like every little excuse, it's like, oh, okay, here, like making up for time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, to the extent that my mom, she passed away in October. We were cleaning out her things. She had little red envelopes already filled and set aside for my stepdaughters for the future. I know, doesn't that make you
Wow.
just right?
Yes.
That that, but what she was doing was showing this is how we love. Like this is how we take care of each other. Make you feel welcome. Like to be known and seen and cherished, right? Um, so I will tell you that the biggest compliment, okay, you just gave me such a great compliment by saying like this book resonated with you. But there's an organization, China's Children International, and it's really
Yeah.
for young adults from like, 20 something. So your daughter probably is
Yeah,
now
no,
that
I
age group.
actually was looking at the back of the book and I texted
Yeah.
her today. Have you heard of this organization? She's like, "Oh yeah, mom." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay."
Well, this group had gotten behind this book. The president read it.
Oh, that's very cool.
She wrote me this long letter and she said she's told her mom that they were going to have their own little mini book club to read this.
No.
Because she's like, this is what it felt like when I was 10 or 11. And that, you know, I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping around.
That's okay.
I just did this workshop with Microsoft writers, people who wanted to go and get published. And I said to them, my barometer of success has completely changed over the last 20 years that I've been writing. As a younger writer, it's like you dream of like the New York Times bestseller. I'm
Yeah.
old now. And what I realized is much more meaningful. It's
Yes. It
conversation. It's you saying, you know what, you got the white parent right. That journey,
Yeah.
you got that right too. And to hear from this young woman from China's Children International say, I've never felt more seen than in this book. And I'm
Okay,
thinking
and
to
then
myself,
now you're going to have a good cry for a while. I knew I wasn't going to get through this without being emotional.
right? Yes, exactly. And you think so what I tell writers now, especially people who are newer to writing,
Yeah.
sometimes your audience is one person.
Yes.
And if your book can change that one person, you've done good work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I could very much resonate with that. I write nonfiction, and I
Mhm.
had a teacher write me at one point and say, "Oh, I had this student and she loved your book so much that she wants to grow up and be an oceanographer." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I'm good now." I have
Wow.
achieved what I wanted to achieve, because it is. I mean, it's one thing to have accolades from, like, it's librarians or other adult readers or whatever, and that does feel good, but what you really care about is the kids, or adult kids, that see themselves in that experience, or
Exactly. And that's why I actually think so many adults read middle grade and young
yeah,
adult. Because,
100%. Yeah.
because it's like there's some unresolved stuff that happened in those critical years of becoming who we are. And now reading a book, you have somebody who's articulating what it is you felt,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
then you're like, oh, yeah, yeah,
That's why.
yeah.
And then, so it's actually the most tender CSI you could do for your heart, right? Which is kind of reading. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I do feel like that's why it resonates so much with us, and that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's very healing to go back and read a story, because I think reading stories is all about feeling seen in a
Exactly.
lot of ways. I mean, some of it's reading and having this great adventure that you wouldn't otherwise have. But I think that there's a lot of feeling like you can identify with something in a character. And
Exactly. It-
as a white reader, like, that was most of my experience reading,
Mhm.
but then you become very aware that not everybody has had that. And then now we're seeing more and more books that represent more than more people. And I feel like that's what I want to tell every white reader is, we want everybody to feel the way you did when you read, My Side of the Mountain, or Anne of Green Gables, or whatever it was, and you went, "Oh, I think I'm like Anne, or I think I'm like, Sam, or whatever, in these particular ways." And you want
Yeah,
everybody to have that experience.
that is so apt because, even under the feeling seen, it's feeling like you are okay. Because if there's one other person who had that feeling that you may have been too ashamed to admit you felt that way, right? That you're actually okay. This is, you know, eh, um, um, this is that universality that kind of combine that connects us.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that happens is, if you are a white reader and
Mhm.
you're reading a story about somebody else,
Yes.
there's also there's a richness, because your world is expanding, but there's also hey, we have these things in common. We're not
Yeah,
different.
we're
In
not
some ways, we're really not different at all. And I think that's
right.
important. So,
And maybe in the important ways,
yes.
you're not so different. Because what's important, it is our emotional experiences, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's so beautiful when you watch a movie and it's in a different language, but the way they're speaking, like intently, they're having a hard
Yes.
conversation. It's
Yeah.
like conversation too, right? Or,
Yeah.
or they're
Yeah.
laughing uproariously. It's like, oh, well, that's the mother tongue right there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Laughter, the tears.
Exactly.
Hmm.
I'm gonna like broaden out a little bit from Dessie May and Donna's story, because I was looking at your website today. You have a lot of books and a lot of different, like, so you have a picture book and some YA books and some adult books and some nonfiction. And I am just curious, how do you um manage the jumping around between different age levels? Is that something that you have to consciously stop and say, okay, Now I'm writing, and I'm always curious because I have written for not for adults, well, a little bit, but mostly for K-12. But I've written, like the kindergarten book and the grade 12 book, and it is an exercise in, okay,
Yes.
who's the audience for this one? How do you manage that? Do you work on different projects at the same time, or do you have to limit yourself to like one project at a time to kind of keep that all straight?
That is such a good question. So voice, and voice in different age groups. Okay. So in my other world, I've been a speechwriter for almost 20 years. And so working with leaders, speech writing is tuning your ear to someone's voice so that you capture it. Okay. And I think the same thing is true for novels. What I find is that it's easier for my brain if I am incubating one book, one genre, one voice at a time. Because I do start getting confused,
Yeah.
And so for me, it's better if it's sequentially. I changed my writing process actually over the pandemic, um, so that I could kind of capitalize on all the voices I hear. So my son, he's 28 now, but in the pandemic, he had started a new job and then the pandemic hit and he couldn't go into work. And so he's like, what am I going to do with my time? So he challenged himself to write a novel in a week. He did it. Okay. It
Wow.
was a messy
That's
first draft, but
impressive.
not
Yeah.
that
It's
messy.
still impressive.
It was a story held up. Okay. And so I thought to myself, that usually I'm so laborious, like I will think through the entire story. And so I thought to myself, okay, what if I gave myself a week to play with an idea and come up with a pretty detailed synopsis? So, like a 10-page single space synopsis. So I know all of the plot beats. Okay. Then in 3 weeks, can I turn out a novel? And I found out, yes, I can. And so in the last year, I've written, I think, 4 first drafts. So now so last year was my creation time, like, so
Yeah.
writing so fast. And so now this next 2 years, I have 4 first drafts now, in different genres, that now I can pick up and I can start really doing the rewrite and really
Yeah.
doing the in-depth work. So that really freed me because what it does is I really paid attention to the character's story instead of doing all the research. I'm so, as we talked about with Twice the Love Dessie Mei, I do so much research, and research can really just stop your momentum,
It absolutely can.
right?
Because you're like,
Uh-huh.
oh, there's this thing, and then there's
Yeah,
this other thing,
so
and there's this
funny
other
like that.
thing.
Yes, and before you know it, a full day has gone by.
Yeah.
And that thing that you researched so intently, it turned out to be one sentence in the entire novel or entire
But
work.
it was a very important sentence.
Yes, exactly. This is the Veritas. Doesn't it feel real? Well, yeah, but
Yeah, I mean, there is a certain amount of, you have to have like 10 times the expertise behind it to come
yeah,
to be able to pull it off. But
yes.
yes, there is that moment of, I just spent 3 hours researching, a single thing. Like maybe that wasn't such a good use of my time.
You're right.
So I
Hmm.
have Dan in chat over in our on the YouTube is asking if you ever, essentially they're asking if you have characters from your books that ever cross over,
Yeah.
and then also if there is a sequel planned for either Dessie Mei or any of the other books.
Oh, those are great questions. Thank you, Dan. Um, so, um, yes, I love to layer lots of Easter eggs. I'm not as good as Taylor Swift, but I like to plant Easter eggs in my work. And so I do have my characters popping up, so characters from, a YA novel will pop up and um, be in here. So there's like a little reference to one of the YA characters in with Twice the Love
Ah,
Disney. So I
yeah,
love, love, love
that's
doing
great.
that. I feel like most of my stories are single books, standalone novels. I have had, so North of Beautiful, let me see, right here. So this book right here. I think that's probably my most well-known work. Um, every week, this book came out in 2008, and every week I still hear from readers. Just this last week, a reader posted that this was her favorite book. She still reads it twice a year. She commissioned an artist to create art based on different quotes in the book. And so that book is the one that everybody asks for a sequel, but I feel like her
Yeah.
story is complete. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
complete. We don't need more. We don't need more. We know she's gonna be okay.
Yeah, I
She's
think that that's interesting because because I write nonfiction, no one's asking for a sequel, but I have other writer friends who
Mhm.
deal with that too. Oh, you've got to write a sequel. You've got to write a sequel. But I think as a writer, like you're not really telling the person's whole story. You're
Mm-mm.
telling a piece of it.
Right. An important,
And
like
if you
the
get it
pivotal
to a place
moment.
where it's
Yes.
stable, like
Yes.
the reader gets to tell the rest of the story in a way.
I
And
completely agree with that.
and you're not necessarily going to be the one that's going to tell the rest of the story, and that's okay. But I think for a lot of readers are like, but I want you to tell more of it. So,
So this is why we love the writers who do write series. I'm so
yes,
grateful for that.
yes, yeah,
There are lots of characters who I want to just linger with,
yes,
you know?
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, but for me, I'm just like, oh,
That's
it's
okay.
complete.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's complete.
Yeah, yeah. And I think honestly that's the other thing that I find fascinating about that is that's in the way that's the beauty of the fanfic is
Yes.
that somebody can take the story that they love so much and then imagine other things that might happen. And I don't know, I think that that's just a neat way of
Yes.
people taking a story that meant a lot and then thinking about, well, what else happens in this person's story? And
Yeah. Or something that's incomplete for them that they
yes, yeah,
want to
yeah,
complete for that character.
yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Oh, this has been so lovely. Thank you so much for talking with us. I don't have any more questions in the chat, but I was going to ask you, I'm going to lean over here and grab a pencil because I would love to write down a couple more of those books that you said that you
Oh, okay.
were aware
Okay.
of. I know that
Yes.
we've had a couple in the store, and I'm totally blanking
Okay.
as to the
1 second.
names of them. But
Yes. Let me grab my little my pile.
oh yay.
Yeah, I will bring my pile over. Okay. All right. So, this is like my pile of research. Okay. So I think Wish. I think
I
this is,
I don't think I realized that was. I think we've had that one in the store. I don't think I realized that was an adoptee story.
yeah. So,
Cool.
okay. Um, I think, let's see. Okay. Um, okay, Shannon Gibney. Shannon, she she is a beautiful, beautiful award-winning writer, and I just think she writes very complex stories. And so this is really great. Um, okay, Eric Smith edited this book.
Oh, that's
Mhm. So it's
cool.
adoption themed fictional short stories, and I think people would really get a lot out of that. Um, let's see. Okay. I would love to share some of the reference materials that
Oh yes, please. And
I
I just so you all know, I will also put this in chat. So if you are watching this now or at the replay, you don't have to write it all down real fast. I'll put it in the comments so that you can get it.
thank you so much for doing that. So when I was writing this book, I worked with a therapist who works with a lot of adoptee children. And so she gave me a reading list, which I thought was so helpful and informative. So this is more for parents, parenting through the storm, and parenting in the eye of the storm, an adoptive parent's guide to navigating the teen years. And so I thought that was great because, Donna and Dessie in the story are on the precipice of teendom. She said, read Shame and Guilt, Masters of Disguise. And I thought this was really quite good because, we were talking about cultural imposterhood. So a lot of that was in there. Let me see. Um, okay. I also really loved Growing Up Asian American. I thought this is more of an academic read. But again, in all my works, I like to steep it in academic research to make sure I'm handling the material
Yeah. Yeah.
correctly, 'cause you just don't want to do any harm. And this was the most sensitive material I've ever
Yeah.
worked with, and I wanted to make sure I got it right. Okay. Now, there's a through line in with Twice the Love, Dessie Mei on justice. And so so a lot of it was with the Asian American civil rights movement. And Paula Yu has written this epic, From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry. She is amazing. I mean, this woman, talk about being able to write across every genre. But she started as an investigative reporter, and you could tell she is amazing. Kristin Rowe-Finkbeiner wrote a book called Keep Marching, and I just really wanted to understand again, how do movements happen, right? And with the girls, when something terrible happens in the Asian American community, an elder gets beaten up, an elder who's important in the story.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that, again, I'm handling it correctly. And of course, the amazing John Lewis National
Yeah.
Book Award winning books. These, I went through this again because, again, I just wanted to make sure I was handling all that information.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask you a final question as we tie up, but in a way you've already kind of answered it, but I think we can maybe tie it up in a nice little bow. And I'm curious what you hope readers, especially adoptees who are readers, take away from Dessie Mae's and Donna's story.
Hmm. I think I can encapsulate that with two words: I belong. I belong. That is my greatest hope. Every day when I hit the computer, and whether it was the empty page or revision draft number 10, what I knew was how I wanted my readers to feel at the end. And I definitely want them at the very last sentence, very last word to really feel with utter conviction, I belong.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. I really appreciate it. And everybody go buy the book because it's really
From a
wonderful.
store.
And I think it's, if you have any adoptees in your family, I think this will be especially special to them. But I think it's a story that everybody everybody will come away from having something special for them, regardless of where you are. And so I really encourage you to read it, no matter how old you are. It's a good book. Thank you
Thank,
so much, Justina.
thank you so much for having me here. It's just been pure joy. Thank you.